Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being with us here this evening. I want to thank everyone that is watching this video on YouTube as well for joining us this evening. Tonight, the McConnell Center gathers to help commemorate the anniversary of the signing of the United States Constitution on September the 17th, 1787. And it's been tonight is part of a week of studying and thinking about the American constitutional order. We also gather tonight as part of our efforts to explore the works and the themes and the insights of Alexis de Tocqueville and his Democracy in America. If you have not already signed up and have started to join us in our effort to read Democracy in America this year and think about its themes, I urge you to go to McConnellCenter.org. It's McConnellCenter.org, where you can find a reading guide, videos, and podcasts that will help you explore that very important book. We're also marking tonight the end of the time in Louisville with our U.S. Army SBS cohort of 2023. The 21 soldiers that are here with us this evening have been studying the Constitution, its origins and development. We've been studying ancient philosophy and the rising challenges in the world for America in the 21st century. We have had a tremendous, I think, time together. I want to thank the soldiers that are here tonight for their efforts over the last 3 weeks of doing the hard work, doing the homework necessary, engaging in the conversations that will help them make them better leaders, better citizens, better statesmen, and I know will help leaven the United States Army. To represent the SBS class of 2023, I would like to call upon Captain Juan Reyes and Captain David Byers to take us to dinner. Juan?
Good afternoon, everyone. I stand here before you today with an immense gratitude in my heart on behalf of the participants of the Strategic Broadening Seminar. This remarkable journey has been made possible through the efforts of the University of Louisville McConnell Center staff. So first and foremost, I want to express our heartfelt appreciation to the dedicated staff members who orchestrated this seminar. So Nan Mosher, David Ramsey, Mary Catherine Melley, Bryson Sebastian, Madeline Shelton, Jessica Friels, Sherry Allen, Megan Waters, Dr. Greg, the McConnell scholars, and all the different instructors that join us throughout this journey. Your unwavering commitment to fostering broader, educated, and more adaptable leaders is commendable. The knowledge and experience we gained during this program will undoubtedly shape our future role as military leaders. Through the seminar, we have dived into diverse topics from ancient Greek philosophy to contemporary global events. The variety and depth of the discussion has broadened our perspective and enriched our understanding of leadership and strategic thinking. Our journey has been anything but ordinary. A special thank you for infusing this educational experience with some Kentucky-style fun along the way. And what I mean by that, I mean the bourbon. In closing, we are in debt to the McConnell Center for this extraordinary seminar. Your dedication to our growth and development as Army leaders has not gone unnoticed, and we leave here inspired and better equipped for the challenges ahead. So thank you all for making this BSB possible.
Before we sit down to dinner, I ask y'all to Pray with me. Heavenly Father, we thank you tonight for the fellowship gathered here, for the time you have given us, for the reason that you have gifted to us, and for the food we are about to receive. May the food nourish our bodies, the libation inspire our souls, and the fellowship enlighten our spirit, that we may do all things for your greater glory. Amen.
Good evening. My name is Mary Catherine Medley, and I'm a senior McConnell Scholar. It is my privilege tonight to welcome you all here to the PNC Club at Cardinal Stadium. I also want to extend our appreciation to all those who are watching online. Tonight's events are part of the McConnell Center's week of studying the United States Constitution and related programming on American government as a whole. Sorry. This weekend will be the 236th anniversary of the signing of the Constitution on September 17, 1787. Our lecture this evening continues our year-long efforts to understand America and the challenges to American democratic governance through the eyes of Alexis de Tocqueville. We urge everyone watching to join us in a year-long study of Tocqueville's Democracy in America. You can find full information, including a reading guide, podcasts, and other videos on mcconnellcenter.org. Tonight is also our farewell dinner for the 21 soldiers of our Strategic Broadening Seminar, and as we prepare to send them back to their families and their careers, I know I speak for all of us when I thank them for their service to our country and say how much we appreciated having them with us these last few weeks. Tonight, it is our honor to have with us Dr. Stephen B. Smith of Yale University. Stephen B. Smith received his PhD from the University of Chicago. He has taught at Yale since 1984 and is the Alfred Cowles Professor of Political Science. He is also the co-director of Yale's Center for the Study of Representative Institutions that focuses on the theory and practice of representative government in the Anglo-American world. His research has focused on the history of political philosophy with special attention to the problem of the ancients and moderns, the relation of religion and politics, and theories of representative government. He is the author of a number of books on Hegel, Spinoza, Leo Strauss, and Isaiah Berlin. But tonight, his talk is related to his 2021 book, Reclaiming Patriotism in an Age of Extremes. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Stephen Smith.
Ouch. Thank you very much. Mary Catherine, that was lovely. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you, it really is. It's an honor. It's more than a pleasure, it's an honor. And I want to thank Gary Gregg for inviting me. I'm not entirely sure why he did. We've never met before, and I've enjoyed meeting him, and I really enjoyed learning about this extraordinary program and the way in which it brings together professional military people and college students and spending time together and studying serious texts, studying history, studying political theory. It's a really beautiful experience, I think, and listening to you and have conversation at dinner really made me appreciate the kind of work that's being done here, and I think it's fantastic. I wish I had something like this at my university. I really do. Before I get into the talk, I want to say a couple of just kind of personal things first. I've never been to Louisville before. First time here. But I have roots in Louisville. What do I mean by that? My great-grandparents, who came to this country from Latvia and Estonia. They came in the later part of the 19th century. For reasons that we have lost in our family history, they moved to Louisville. And they are buried in Louisville. And I want to thank, in particular, Matthew Rayanga, your colleague, who, after our seminar this afternoon, drove me out to the cemetery the Jewish cemetery out, here in Louisville, where I was able to find the graves and say a prayer on the graves of my great-grandparents who died back in the 1930s. So I do feel a connection, which I will never forget. It's just beautiful. The other thing, a little not quite as serious. I've heard a number of you mention in the course of the day Henry Clay, famous, Kentucky statesman of the, first generation after the founding, the great conciliator, as he was called. Lincoln, the youngish Lincoln, said he would describe Clay, said he was this beau ideal of a statesman. Why do I bring this up? Because this past spring, we became grandparents. My wife and I, we became grandparents for the second time. And shortly after the birth of young Nathaniel, Nate, as they call him, my son told me he went online to look at, who was born on the same day, wanted to find out. He found out he was born, he called me up, he said, he was born on the same day as Henry Clay. I said, Josh, I can guarantee you are the only parent in Brooklyn who has called up and said, my son was born on the same day as Henry Clay. Who put a picture up in his little bedroom, his little room anyway. So we have that connection to Kentucky anyway. So enough. I want to talk a little bit about, and one more thing before I start. I've enjoyed just the casual conversations this evening, especially. And before we sat down, I was with a group, and I was curious, why do people join the military? And I was asking a bunch of you about this, like a group of you, what was about this? And Ms. Ashley Creighton, where is she? She said to me, in my case, it was pure patriotism. Well, you said that right. So that struck me, because that's what I'm speaking about tonight, patriotism. I wrote a book 2 years ago now, Reclaiming Patriotism in an Age of Extremes. Patriotism is, I wouldn't call it an endangered virtue exactly, but it's a problematic virtue, and I want to talk tonight about patriotism, what it is, raise some questions about patriotism, and perhaps give you a little bit of a taste of what the book is about. I wish I'd thought to bring a copy, but I was such a dunce. I left and I didn't bring a copy with me. Anyway, so bear with me while I'm going to give a little talk. Mention the word patriot or patriotism on a university campus or in educated circles, and you are likely to hear Samuel Johnson's barb that patriotism is the last refuge of a scoundrel. Or maybe you might hear E.M. Forster's comment where he said if he had to betray either his country or his friend, he wished to have the guts to betray his country. Maybe even you've heard George Bernard Shaw's witty statement that patriotism is the belief that your country is best because you were born there. But despite these views, this is hardly to say that patriotism is on the verge of disappearance. But in many ways it has come to be seen as ethically challenged in today's climate of cancel culture. In fact, for the most part, once you leave any urban environment, it is not difficult at all to find people with no reservations about their love of country who are willing to express it on bumper stickers on their cars, and in bars and diners, and in houses of worship. The problem is that the country many profess to love is often at odds with what many of us would find welcoming. It can be insular, exclusionary, and intolerant. So given this dilemma, what is a liberal like myself and a patriot also like myself to do? And that was the dilemma I found myself in when I decided to write my book. I must admit that one of the secret pleasures I had in writing the book was in looking at the expressions of shock, of horror, and occasionally of disgust on the faces of colleagues when I told them I was writing a book defending patriotism. But patriotism has always been a contested virtue. Why? Because it has to contend, patriotism, I'm going to talk about as a form of loyalty, it has to contend with other loyalties. Loyalties to friends, loyalties to family, loyalties to tribe, loyalties to religion. Any reader of Sophocles' Antigone would immediately recognize the conflict between loyalty to family and loyalty to state is as old as Western literature. In the case of the virtual inevitable conflict of loyalties, it is never clear, or it is not clear, which side should have priority. In modern patriotism, today, has to contend with two alternatives that vie for dominance in our contemporary culture. On the right, political right, that is, patriotism has to contend with, and I think needs to be distinguished from nationalism. Nationalism and patriotism grow out of a common root, a desire for self-determination, a desire to have your culture and your way of life strong and respected. But in many ways, nationalism has morphed into an ideology of grievance and resentment. It has become a weapon for determining who is in and who is out, who is the real American and who is not. Nationalist stories are typically narratives of treason and betrayal by unscrupulous elites, in which listeners or readers are encouraged to feel contempt for fellow citizens who fall outside of the dominant in-group. Nationalists may seek the warmth of community, but always at the expense of an out-group who are deemed un-American, who are deemed traitorous, or enemies of the people. On the left, the critique of patriotism is undertaken by multiculturalism, or what is sometimes called identity politics. Multiculturalism was initially just an academic theory that sought to give voice to previously underrepresented minorities, women, African Americans, gays. But over time, it too has morphed into a kind of race for victim status and a far-reaching critique of American history. Critical race theory, as it is sometimes called, dates the American founding from the time when 20 African slaves were sold to the Jamestown colony in Virginia. And on this account, even the American Revolution is presented as based upon persistent racial supremacy, racial oppression and white supremacy. And although these claims have been widely repudiated by some of our best historians, they continue to gain traction in schools and universities. Such a view is based on a radical simplification and reduction of all American history to a single theme. The fact is that even at the time of the American founding, the institution of slavery was highly contested. Jefferson's original version of the Declaration of Independence included a pointed denunciation of slavery as a practice incompatible with the rights of man. Benjamin Franklin and Alexander Hamilton were heads of the abolitionist societies in Pennsylvania and New York, and so on. From our very beginnings, slavery was a contested institution, and to pretend that the defense of white supremacy is the one constant running throughout our history is false to the facts of our national experience. One reason I cannot accept this view of America as a white supremacist nation is that it denies the efforts of generations of Americans, both black and white, in their struggle to achieve a more perfect union. Slavery is an irreparable stain on America, but it is not the essence of America. So how does patriotism differ from these two alternatives, these two extremes? These are the two extremes that I sketch in my book. And for those of you, I know you've been studying a little Aristotle, you will remember that for Aristotle, the virtues represent always the kind of virtuous mean between two extremes. And in my book, I sort of describe patriotism in this way. It is a mean between the kind of excessive, the excess on one side, which is nationalism, and the deficiency on the other side, which is a kind of multicultural cosmopolitanism. So where does patriotism hit the kind of sweet spot in the middle between there? Let me try to make a couple of definitions. Patriotism is, above all, a form of loyalty. It's a form of love or loyalty. And we admire loyalty in all forms. Loyalty to family, loyalty to friends, loyalty to sports teams, loyalty to institutions like the Army and the other institutions of our national life. We admire loyalty up to a point. Why do I qualify it? Because loyalty can sit uneasily with other qualities that we equally admire. Qualities of fairness, justice, mercy, equality, and open-mindedness. These do not always sit easily together or fit easily together. There is something primitive. There's something that seems primitive, almost kind of primordial about loyalty, like the kind of mafia code of omerta, of silence, to hold the group together. In our society, in our country, patriotism is ultimately a form of loyalty to the Constitution, what I want to call constitutional loyalty. It is not simply loyalty to a people, but loyalty to a particular constitutional order of the kind we were talking about this afternoon in the Federalist Seminar, that we can call a liberal democracy or a constitutional democracy, Our Pledge of Allegiance is an oath to the flag and to the republic for which it stands. This already stakes a claim. American patriotism is not a patriotism of blood and soil, but to a form of government, a republic, or a democracy, as we would call it today. Ours is a uniquely constitutional patriotism, a change of constitution, as opposed to just a change of administration, would require a fundamental change of loyalty. And American patriotism is uniquely, in this respect, also a patriotism of ideas. This is why when you come into a course like this, you're studying Plato and Aristotle and the Federalist Papers. You're studying the big ideas of the Western tradition to see where America fits in this long narrative arc of Western history. Ours is a patriotism of ideas from the beginning. Even before the Constitution, Americans thought of themselves as a people of the book, or maybe of the books. The Puritans thought of themselves as recreating a city on the hill, as it was called, a New Jerusalem in the wilderness of New England. And when you go through Connecticut, as I hope some of you will eventually, you will see towns with names like Salem, Bethel, New Haven, all biblical names that recall the Puritan founding of themselves. The seal of the university where I teach is in Hebrew, Urim Vitumim, loosely translated as light and truth. Why? Because the founders of that university one of the first presidents of Yale University, a man named Ezra Stiles, thought it was necessary that all students at Yale had to learn Hebrew. Why? Because Hebrew was the holy tongue, and Stiles had a vision that he would be unable to enter the gates of heaven unless he could communicate in Hebrew. And that actually didn't last very long, as you can imagine. But that was, it goes back to the idea that we, as a people, think of ourselves as a people of the book in that way. And from our beginnings, patriotism has been a patriotism of ideas. But loyalty to a constitutional order is not just a matter of the head, you might say, of principles, great principles, founding ideas, founding texts. It is also a matter of the heart. The man who you've been studying this week, Alexis de Tocqueville, spoke, you remember, in that beautiful, beautiful phrase, he spoke about the habits of the heart. And patriotism is a matter not just of the heart, but of the head. Or if I can use a Greek term or two Greek terms that will be familiar maybe from Aristotle, patriotism is not just a matter of logos, of reason and intellect, but it's of ethos. Patriotism is a matter of, not just a matter of thinking, but it's of sensibility and feeling. The concept of ethos patriotism, again, comes from a Greek word that means habit or character. Famous Greek philosopher Heraclitus said that a man's ethos is his destiny, suggesting that character is fate. And the idea of ethos suggests that every people has a peculiar character, a way of life, a language, a set of moral habits, of customs, of sensibilities, of accents and inflections that distinguishes them from others. This is not to say that every person obviously is going to be within the same ethos group is going to be identical, but they do exhibit some characteristic ways, some characteristic traits where we can say of a person, when we see them, particularly if we see them abroad, we can identify who's an American. You can just do it by the way they talk, by the way their inflection, their voice, their habits. Something is characteristically American or characteristically French. We intuit what those are. So patriotism requires these common characteristics of ethos and habit and disposition that make it, as well as an ethos of, as well as a patriotism ideas, is to combine those two things. But here, ethos patriotism, as I've been calling it, runs into a difficulty. What is it? Because doesn't loyalty to one way of life, my loyalty to our own way of life, my preference for our own way of life, can also stand in contradiction with the principles of equality and moral inclusiveness that are also seem to be parts of American patriotism. How can I regard all persons as equal if my loyalties are to my country alone? Where is the line drawn between what we owe to fellow citizens and what we owe to fellow human beings who may be experiencing pain and suffering? Do our principles simply end at our borders? I think some version of that question is what we are struggling with today when it comes to issues of border security and immigration. And I see this every day in New York, where I live part-time, where immigrants are coming by the thousands, putting stress on our city services, on our capacities for shelter, on education. And this raises deep and troubling questions for who we are. Are we at bottom a nation of immigrants who welcome the stranger, your huddled masses yearning to be free, as Emma Lazarus wrote for the Statue of Liberty? Or do we require strict border security as a way of protecting our national sovereignty? How broadly or narrowly do we draw that line? In defining ourselves too broadly, we risk losing our ethos. In defining ourselves too narrowly, we risk losing our humanity. I wish I had an answer to this. Another fear is that ethos patriotism leads us to ignore past and present injustices, resulting in a kind of willful blindness to our national sins, of which there have been many. This is a legitimate concern, but it is not necessarily decisive. Patriotism, as I understand it, can in fact be critical and self-correcting. Consider the case of Congressional Medal of Honor winners who had previously been overlooked due to their race. What is this but an expression of regret for our previous failures and a desire to enlarge who is considered part of our national family? Or to take another example, no one ever doubted Ronald Reagan's patriotism, and yet he apologized to Japanese Americans for their internment during World War II. So patriotism and self-criticism and self-reflection are not necessarily at odds with each other. Patriotism is not simply my country right or wrong. Rather, it is a desire to see our country live up to its highest promises. This was the idea behind Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous letter from a Birmingham jail, in which King appealed to the country to live up to its founding principles. Like Lincoln before him, he appealed to the Declaration of Independence as America's mission statement and as his constant pole star. Even while protesting Southern segregation statutes, he did not lose faith in America and in its progressive aspirations. King's simple and dignified resistance show how patriotism can indeed be combined with self-critique and even resistance. I'm also reminded here of Abraham Lincoln's description, partly a little bit comical, his description of Americans as an almost chosen people. The term almost suggesting there is still work to be done. Lincoln and King appealed to what is best in our traditions, not to what is worst. Critique is best exercised when it grows not out of detachment and resentment, but out of care and out of love. This is an example, I think, which many of today's social justice advocates might take a lesson. Things were not always this way, however. Colleges and universities were once considered the custodians of our most important civic values. Fields like history, political science, and literature were thought to prepare one for a life of national service. Patriotism was not indoctrination into an ideology, but a component of an educated mind. The proper love of country is not just something we inherit, it must be taught. And like anything that must be taught, it requires teachers to do it. The proper love of country belonged to a literary tradition that might include Shakespeare's great patriotic speech and Richard II. You remember, this blessed plot, this earth, this realm, this England. But in an American context, it would include works like Benjamin Franklin's autobiography, Ralph Waldo Emerson's Self-Reliance, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, and F. Scott Fitzgerald's Great Gatsby, all of which taught generations of students what it means to be an American. Today, we would add the names of Frederick Douglass, James Baldwin, and Toni Morrison to that list. Today, I think it is important that we try to recapture this sense of patriotism from these two contending dispositions that I mentioned earlier. Those on the left have largely ignored patriotism when they have not been openly contemptuous of it. They view any expression of national loyalty as an expression of racism and white supremacy. But if patriotism must be rehabilitated and recaptured from those on the left, it must equally be taken back from those on the right. For them, love of country is too often, again, a cudgel to separate and divide the ins from the outs. Among the new nationalists are people who see themselves at war with relativism, multiculturalism, and identity politics that they view as posing an existential threat to American character. The language of fear, invasion, and impurity remains a staple of this rhetoric. But whatever may be the sins of multiculturalists, I would say they are not enemies of the state. We were at war in Germany, in Japan, in Korea, in Vietnam, and in Iraq. We are not at war with other Americans over their claim to cultural identity. This language of culture war has in turn turned patriotism into a game of capture the flag, where each side expresses feigned outrage at the moral idiocies of the other. Both of these extremes are dehumanizing. They are a mirror of one another. If patriotism misused can be harsh and punitive, at its best, it can be elevating and ennobling. It would be easy, as we witness the rise of ethno-nationalisms in various parts of the world, to reject patriotism as tainted with xenophobia, racism, and other forms of ethnic and religious bigotry. But things are not that simple. These are not expressions of patriotism, but perversions of it. Patriotism is frequently presented as making sacrifices for one's country during times of war, and in the extreme case, sacrifice of life itself. We all enjoy movies like Steven Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan or Clint Eastwood's Flags of Our Fathers because they depict heroism of men in battle making the ultimate sacrifice in times of war, and of course cause us to wonder what we would do in their situation. And yet this is true on the extreme occasions, but more often, patriotism is a lowercase virtue that demands qualities like civility, respect for law, tolerance, honor, and responsibility. It involves everyday acts of decency, or if I can quote Lincoln again, with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right. These everyday virtues speak to what remains decent in our national character. And if they seem too much or too little to ask, then a future generation may be incapable of any greater sacrifice when it no doubt will be required. Thank you very much. I will be delighted. In fact, I want to say I refuse to step down unless there is at least one question. I love to take questions. Would anyone please be first?
I'll go first.
Please.
Dr. Smith.
I prefer a student, but go ahead. Okay.
I'm definitely a student.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding. Can you give us, tell us, you mentioned in your talk, you mentioned in your talk, Congressional Medal of Honor.
Yeah.
But not non-white people.
Right.
In the past who've been honored more recently.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us, so maybe an anecdote or two that as examples of these, just as an example of what you're talking about?
Well, I wish I don't have one offhand. Thank you for that. I mean, I've read about these in the newspaper, and maybe some of our military people have probably far better inside knowledge about this. But I do know, the Tuskegee Airmen and people of that generation who made great sacrifice and were, again, completely forgotten for generations until, they were, and I take things like this as an example of self-correcting patriotism. Why patriotism does not have to be regarded simply as uncritical of one's own past. I think that's a completely false view. But That's about as good as I can
Yeah,
do,
maybe
yeah.
ask a follow-up.
Please do, yeah.
Can you tell us someone living today who you look up to and consider a true patriot?
It's a great question, and I can give you a very quick answer to that. The beautiful people in this room today, who I've learned from and I've enjoyed even a brief time talking to, and just have great respect for what they've done in life and how they've decided to honor their country. And you know, I'm sure it's not an easy choice to make, and it's very moving for me to. So thank you for that. You're a great straight man. You asked me that. Thank you. Well, if there's, oh, please. Okay, in the back.
Hi, my name is Riley. I'm a freshman
Okay.
scholar. My question is, what are ways that we can exemplify the type of patriotism that you talk about in your book and in your speech in our daily lives, like as people, without like promoting the stereotypes of like,
Right.
you know, the things that you were talking about in your speech?
Find someone who you deeply disagree with or deeply disagrees with you, and start a conversation. Show them that you're a real person, whatever your beliefs are, and take seriously and with respect what they're saying. Because I think that's the only way of restoring any sense of kind of national, order, national pride in our country, is that people will listen to each other and talk to each other. It's very easy to be noisy and about patriotism. It lends to misuse. Like every virtue, it lends to a misuse. That's Aristotle's point. Every virtue is a mean between different misuses, and patriotism is no different. So I think one way to do that, like I say, is engage with someone, whether it's in your dorm room or in class or over lunch in the dining hall or whatever. Show them your humanity and your willingness to listen and to tolerate and to respect difference. I think would be a wonderful place to begin. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah? No? Okay, we're good. Thank you very much. Okay.
Dr. Smith, thank you for that amazing lecture. I'll speak on behalf of all of us when I thank you for making the trip down to Louisville and for being with us all here tonight. I hope everyone watching online will join us for the next lecture in this series, which will be Gracie Olmstead speaking on The Power of the Particular, Tocqueville's Vision for Stewardship in Place, which should be available on this YouTube channel on September 20th. Thank you and have a good night.